to be enormous. It's going to bring our manufacturing. It's like the original NAFTA when Canada's economy went up 10 times because of the manufacturing it took from the US. You're going to see the supply chain start to come back. Reasonable men can disagree. The American First national security policy is to the rules-based international order is on the backs of the deplorables. It's their sons and daughters in the Hindu Kush, in the South China Sea, on the 38th parallel. That network of commercial relationships, capital markets, trade deals, from Europe to the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea to Northwest Pacific. President Trump is trying to reinforce that. Make NATO work. Make the Gulf Emirates work. Have free navigation in the South China Sea. And make our allies in the populist nationalist movement in Europe, as I've gone around and met the leaders, and I'm not an advisor to these individuals. I've set up a group called the Movement to be kind of hopefully the interconnective tissue that can help them focus on the European parliamentary elections next year. Not one leader, haven't heard one, say they want to destroy the European Union. What they talk about is the sovereignty of their country. They want their countries back, and they want their countries to be sovereign entities. And they want their citizens to be empowered and not to kind of report to these transnational entities that have no accountability. The ECB and the EU. They want to make the European Union, not the United States of Europe, where Italy's like South Carolina, France is Georgia. They want to make it a collection of sovereign individual states that work together. Why is that so hard, and why is that demonized? Why is the nation state that's been with us, since the Treaty of Westphalia, is the central building block of our world? Why is all of a sudden the nation state so scorned? Why is the term nationalism so scorned and demonized? What people want is subsidiarity. They want as much control as they can have as citizens. And that's through the nation state. Donald Trump gave that back to the American people. I know you may mock and ridicule it, but the economic turnaround didn't come from Obama, and everybody in the United States knows that. The most progressive president in the United States, and he can't defend this, flooded the zone and bailed out the elite in our country. We have socialism in the United States for the very wealthy and the very poor, and a brutal form of Darwinian capitalism for everybody else. The devil catch the hindmost. That's what the future entails if we don't get this right in Trump's administration and further administrations. If we don't bring out the benefits of capitalism, if we allow the millennials are nothing but 18th century Russian serfs right now. They're better fed, they're better clothed, they're in better shape, they have more access to more information. They don't own anything, and they're not going to own anything. Because of what Obama did, they're 20% behind today where their parents were. And they live in a gig economy. They can't afford a house. There's no pension plans. There's no careers. That, by the way, is the biggest potential for our populist movement, is the millennials. Because they're going to see the logic of what we are talking about. Once again, and David, we are not saying we shouldn't have elections. We're not saying, you just don't like it now because the establishment Republicans can't win any elections. What you serve up in all your brilliance, this is the whole thing, the other smear, which I never thought David would stoop to, given my esteem for him as a public intellectual. This whole thing about hate. Donald Trump, when he won, he's supposed to hate Muslims, right? Supposed to be an Islamophobe. Where's the first place Donald Trump went? Read the book. Hang on. It was to bring, bear with me. the Islamic world had reached out to us. There has been limited engagement during the Obama administration. Obama administration was engaged with Iran. So the first summit in Riyadh was set up to talk about and discuss three things that they brought up. Number one, how do you eradicate Islamic terrorism from the face of the earth by cutting off the financing? Number two, how does the Arab world come together as one with Israel to stop the expansion of Iran? And number three, the Islamic world says, we know we have to go through some sort of form of modernity. Can you assist us in some way? We have to do this ourselves, right? Three aspects that they asked for, even before he won the election, when Trump met with them at the UN. So how does Trump get to be called a hater? He went over there and said, hey, here's the system of how we stop the financing of radical Islamic terrorism, because it's blowing back on your societies today in Western Europe and the United States. And look at the improvement we've made in just 2 years. Look at the eradication of the physical caliphate of ISIS that was done in conjunction. Remember, in 2014, ISIS had 8 million people under slavery. They had, oil wells. They were taxing people. That was Trump coming together with the Muslim world to destroy it. In addition, it was the beginning of an alliance, a beginning of a partnership, as imperfect as it is in that part of the world, with the Arab world, in Israel, and the United States, and the nations ultimately of Europe, to stop the expeditionary expansion of Hezbollah in Iran. And the third was to assist the Arab world in any way, understanding they have to do it just like Christianity had to do it, to go through its own enlightenment. And yet Trump is smeared every day as an Islamophobe and a hater. He's anything but, and it's his actions. Look, it's the signal in the noise. Listen to the signal. He puts it out every day through actions. The noise, I understand, is a flashbang grenade, okay?
To come to you on a midterm question also, you've said it, this is a critical test of your guy, of this president. If he does not maintain both houses, his presidency is in real danger, according to you.
Yep.
That's the end of his populist movement. That's the end of your populist icon.
We're just in the top of the first inning on populism. This is a critical test, there's no doubt about it. I think if you look at what's going to happen, I believe we will hold the Senate, and I think it's a complete dogfight for the House, and we'll see. If we lose the House of Representatives, I've told you, and I've seen David talking on TV, the Trump program will grind to a halt. There's no doubt about that. But remember, we understand it's a process. Both Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. Look at Brexit 2 years later. They're no closer to a deal than they first started, right? Because the establishment wasn't just going to pat the British workers on the head and say, what a great idea, why don't you just leave the EU? Just like with Donald Trump, they're not going to pat him on the head and say, this is fantastic. All your great populist and economic nationalist ideas, why don't you just take the keys and run for it? You're going to have to win election after election after election. And I think the Trump base understands that. I anticipate it's going to turn out. But I want to address one thing with David. We won as a coalition. One of the first things I did was reach out to the Republican establishment in mid-August. We had to win as a coalition, just like the Reagan coalition, where you had, economic conservatives, and you had anti-communists, and you had the religious right. We have the same thing. We have the establishment. We have the populist nationalist movement. We have limited government conservatives. We are a broad coalition. That's what needs to come together to win. In governing, David, we turned immediately to the Republican Party, our partner in that victory, who said, we've got it. Give us the keys on health care. We've been working on this for 7 years. The entire debacle on health care in that first year was 100% the Republican establishment. It turns out they didn't really have an idea about health care, okay? The same thing with taxes. Remember, we were going to start with the border adjustable tax that Paul Ryan had worked for 7 years on. In 90 days, that got blown up, and we had to do the tax plan we had, of which, by the way, I argued, as many as you know, to read the Wall Street Journal, in the Oval Office for a 44% tax rate of people that make over $5 million a year. And I was blown up. I was blown up by the progressive Democrats that were in the administration, the Wall Street guys. who forced in the big tax cuts, which President Trump has now realized, I think, was not actually the best thing to do. That's why he brought the middle-class tax cut last week. It did. You know, it takes a while. He's getting his sea legs. You don't start day one.
David, do you want to jump in on this point? Sea legs. I think that's a great segue.
Go ahead. The economy is not only growing at 3.5%, some say maybe 4%. I realize we owe President Obama all that, 3.5%. Trump is taking liquidity out of the market. He's taking $360 billion in quantitative tightening. He's not opening up the spigots to liquidity. And what he's doing in national security, he is the one that's trying to rejuvenate NATO. He is the one that's sitting there and go, hey, you cannot, listen, the British can put up one combat division, the French 2 combat divisions, you know, all the rest of NATO a combat division. The United States can't bear the entire burden. We have a $1 trillion defense bill. I know it says $780 billion. It's $1 trillion, okay? It's $1 trillion. We can't afford to continue to do that. It's not that we don't want to be engaged in the world, and we will be engaged in the world. But what Trump is saying, from Europe to the Persian Gulf, South China Sea, Northwest Europe, it's trade deals, commercial relationships, capital markets, and an American security guarantee. That has to change. We have to have partners like we have allies in Canada, in Israel, in UAE. Everybody else has to step up and be an ally. We're not looking for protectorates. That's what Trump's saying. I haven't seen one, and David, we can get into this. I haven't seen, and I don't want the discussion of populism to devolve to about Trump's presidency. I haven't seen a bad decision from Trump yet.
When we talk about
I'm your setup man.
when we talk about Trump and NATO, this is where I really feel for the poignancy of Steve Bannon's position tonight. Steve Bannon wore the uniform of the United States. I believe your daughter wears it now.
Yeah, she's 101st Airborne.
And Steve Bannon described the Trump family's meeting in Trump Tower with agents of the Russian state as borderline treason. So I accept that you believe in America's defense relationship with its traditional allies, but your president does not and his family does not, and they are selling the United States.
David, do you disagree, though? Let's talk about NATO, because this is about American first national security. Donald Trump is trying to save that alliance. What he's saying is people have to put in 2% of GDP. Right? You just can't continue on like this. When we first stepped in, we put a $30 billion supplemental just because of operational readiness. The entire German defense budget is not more than $30 billion. We're not looking for protectors, and that's what Trump's saying. Trump is more engaged in the Persian Gulf. He's more engaged in the South China Sea. He's more engaged in the Northwest Pacific. He's more engaged in NATO than any president in living memory. But he's doing it in a way to say, hey, we can't bear the entire burden anymore. We just can't. The deplorables, it's all on their shoulders. It's their kids and their money. And it's come time that we're not looking to be an empire. We're not an imperial power. We're a revolutionary power. I want to return to Russia in a second, but I want to talk about the first one. My daughter, when she had her last command, she's back at West Point where she's on the staff. I think she had 15 non-commissioned officers, all of them African-American or Hispanic, right? I think something like a third or 40% of the United States Army today is made up of African-Americans alone. Donald Trump understands that. The deplorables understand that. Remember, one of the focuses we have, that's why black unemployment's so low, Hispanic unemployment's so low. One of the focuses we have as a populist movement is to take 25% of Bernie Sanders' movement, the economic nationalists in that. The focus, and I've said this from day one, it's to get a third to 40% of the African-American vote and a third to 40% of the Hispanic vote, the working class and the middle class. That realignment with the Trump base will give us a governing majority for 50 years. It'll be like 1932. 1.8 million African Americans that voted for Barack Obama did not vote for Hillary Clinton. Now, they weren't prepared to vote for Donald Trump. And I think you're going to see the same thing. They may not be prepared to vote for Donald Trump now, but it's a process. I think that the Democratic Party is going to be in complete shock on Tuesday about the turnout of the African American vote. and I think the Hispanic vote.
That's a question we've got to address tonight, Stephen, which is the incredible hate that has seemed to have surfaced during these midterm elections. You know, you are the avowed architect of the Muslim travel ban in the United States. You participated in that. You are someone who
The travel ban that was upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States, that travel ban?